This video will cover the Unit 2, specifically Reproductive Biology part, and it will mainly cover the overview of hormonal control within reproduction and then the sperm production part. The next video I'll do will focus on the males. So if you haven't already looked at the previous video about structures and functions within the males and females, it suggests that you do that first so that this isn't entirely new to you, because you really will need to know the structures and what they do first before you know any of this. Okay, so from National 5, you'll know that hormones are produced by specific glands known as endocrine glands. Now in National 5, the main endocrine gland that you talked about was the pancreas. But for this now, the main endocrine gland that we're talking about for this particular section is the pituitary gland, and then some of the specific structures within the reproductive system, so the testes and then the ovaries. So hormones are produced by endocrine glands, and within reproduction they control 3 different aspects. So they control the onset of puberty, so when puberty begins, and this begins both in males and females and is triggered by endocrine glands, specifically the pituitary gland, which we're going to talk about. They will control sperm production, and sperm production will specifically happen in males, and then it will control the menstrual cycle, which will obviously happen in females. Now that's just a general overview of this, so when we talk about the females in the next video, this is still the case. Okay, now the stuff I'm just about to talk about the brain, that'll also be the case, so please don't forget that this refers to the females as well. So this is a view of the brain, which is where all of these things, onset of puberty, etc., all begin. So this cerebral cortex was formerly known as the cerebrum when you talked about it in National 5. This is the cerebellum, and then this part here is the medulla. Now all these parts you will still need to know because we talk about them in Unit 3. But for this part, you will need to label 2 new parts of the brain. This part here, which is known as the hypothalamus, and then this part here, which hangs down from the brain a bit, which is called the pituitary gland. Now the hypothalamus has a specific function, and that function is to produce a hormone. So the hypothalamus is also technically an endocrine gland. And the hormone that the hypothalamus produces is called a releaser hormone. And that releaser hormone will act on the pituitary gland. Now, as another part of revision, hormones travel in the blood. This is no different from National 5 to higher, so you still need to remember that that's the case. So they're chemical messengers, and this specific one, the releaser hormone, will travel from that hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. Now that pituitary gland will produce different things if it's in different sexes. So pituitary gland in males will produce a hormone called FSH, which is called follicle stimulating hormone. You only need to know the shortened version of that, so FSH is totally fine. And it will also produce one called ICSH. Now again, that is just shortened version may be fine, ICSH is okay, but specifically it's called the interstitial cell stimulating hormone. Now if it's females, the hormones that are produced are somewhat similar but also somewhat different. So females also produce follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. And they'll produce a different hormone which is known as LH. Now LH stands for luteinizing hormone. So when we talk about the females in the next video, please remember that this is the case, okay, that the hypothalamus is involved, and then that will trigger the pituitary gland to release hormones. Now this video will focus now on the sperm production part. Okay, so we'll continue on to the next bit, which will relate to sperm production in males. Okay, so I'll get rid of this part and put a diagram down for males. Again, like I said, you really need to be watching the previous video to make sure that you know the parts and what each of them do. Now this shows a diagram of the brain, just like I'd shown before. Prostate glands and seminal vesicles, which produce the fluid the sperm swim in, and the testis or testes plural, which produce the sperm. Okay, and as before, this is a zoomed in view of the testes with the seminiferous tubules where the sperm are produced, and the interstitial cells which produce testosterone shown in between these. Now for males, they produce 3 hormones, so it's somewhat simpler than females. They produce FSH, ICSH, and one called testosterone. So a wee way to remember this is FIT, so fit. So if we're talking male hormones, FIT is the way to remember it. Okay? So as I described before, the male hormones, specifically produced by the pituitary gland, are called FSH and ICSH. So I'm just going to have the descriptions running down here below. So FSH and ICSH are produced by the pituitary gland, and they will go to the testes and act upon it. So the testes is their target tissue. Okay, so FSH specifically will move from the pituitary gland, and I'll show this in purple, and it will target a particular area within the testes. It targets specifically the seminiferous tubules. Okay, and within those seminiferous tubules, sperm are produced. So that is the function of FSH, is to then promote sperm production. So FSH will cause sperm production to occur, and specifically within those seminiferous tubules. Now, ICSH is also produced in the pituitary gland, and that will travel from the pituitary gland down to target other cells within the testes. So ICSH will specifically target the cells in between those seminiferous tubules. So ICSH will target the interstitial cells. Now those interstitial cells are stimulated by interstitial cell stimulating hormone to produce testosterone. Okay, so that interstitial cell stimulating hormone will then make those interstitial cells produce testosterone. Okay, now testosterone then, when it's produced, has a number of functions. Okay, so testosterone will stimulate sperm production, so it will go to these seminiferous tubules and it will tell them to continue producing sperm. So testosterone stimulates sperm production in those seminiferous tubules. Now, if you're a male, the whole point is that you're supposed to be producing sperm. Now, sperm can't just get to an egg without having fluid to swim in. So therefore, males need to produce fluid for that sperm to swim through or swim within. So the testosterone will also then target the 2 structures that produce the fluid that the sperm swim in. And those 2 structures are up here. So I'm just going to zoom in over here. That will target the prostate gland, and it will also target the seminal vesicles. Now those 2 parts produce the fluid the sperm swim in, so testosterone will go and activate them to produce that fluid. Okay, so testosterone has 2 functions: stimulates sperm production and activates those prostate glands and seminal vesicles. Okay, so for one singular prostate gland and 2 seminal vesicles to produce the fluid the sperm swim in. So if you look at both the hormones, okay, I'll just make sure that my colouring for these is right. So if you look at both the hormones that produce sperm, or that are involved in sperm production, that would be FSH, because it targets the seminiferous tubules, and also testosterone. So they both have the function of stimulating sperm production. Now, in males, as well as in females, there is a process called negative feedback. Now, essentially, negative feedback will then prevent testosterone, or try and prevent testosterone from getting too high and prevent sperm production from being too much. So testosterone levels, if they get too high, when ICSH will make too much, or make the interstitial cells make too much testosterone, your body will recognise it as too much testosterone, and it will then tell that pituitary gland to slow down the production of ICSH and FSH. Okay, so high levels of testosterone will what's called inhibit the production of FSH. Okay, so testosterone will also go up here, target the pituitary gland, and that will be known as negative feedback. So when that pituitary gland is inhibited, it will slow down and inhibit the production of FSH and ICSH by that pituitary gland. So you inhibit pituitary gland, you slow down the production, and therefore the FSH and ICSH levels will drop. Okay, so both these hormones, FSH and ICSH levels, will decrease because that testosterone is inhibiting their production. So if ICSH levels drop, then the interstitial cells will then produce less testosterone, because that is their function. So if there's less ICSH coming down to the interstitial cells, there's less testosterone being produced by those cells. So therefore, testosterone levels will decrease. Okay, so those levels will drop. So negative feedback tries to keep those levels fairly in balance, so it prevents them from getting too high. So when high levels of testosterone and then reach the brain and reach the pituitary gland, FSH and ICSH will then be inhibited, the production of them will be inhibited, they'll drop, and testosterone levels will drop. Okay, so this is kind of similar to feedback inhibition when it comes to the enzymes part of the metabolic pathways topic we talked about in Unit 1. Okay, so I'm going to stop with this video and I'll move on and do the female reproductive system and the menstrual cycle. Again, if you haven't looked at the very first video, it's really important that you do so that you understand what the structures and functions are.